Hi there, my name is Keith Williams, and this is a little video to try to help adult cello students develop vibrato. Learning vibrato as an adult is quite a bit harder than if you start at a very early age. The reason for that is that, of course, our joints are a little bit older. We've developed some habits. We've maybe developed some tension. We probably have 9-to-5 jobs, and that definitely gives us some tension. But we've also been doing things like typing a lot, or texting, or doing a lot of things, repetitive exercises, driving, for example, things that cause us to keep our hands a little bit tight and a little bit too grippy. And so we have some additional challenges and some things to unlearn, some bad habits that we need to unlearn in order to get a really effective cello vibrato. I've noticed that with a lot of adults, and I'm an adult learner myself, and I notice among my colleagues that most of us, our vibrato, at least at the beginning, sounds very twitchy and nervous, and definitely not at all that really nice pleasing sound that we're trying to get. We're trying to take a wiry sound and make it sound really nice, and it doesn't always work out, right? So this video is intended to give a couple of tips for how to practice vibrato and how to start setting yourself up to have the best possible sound. Rule number one for learning vibrato is that there are no rules. Okay, I think that's something to bear in mind. There are a couple of guidelines and a couple of things for you to explore that make sense for all of us. However, when you start learning vibrato, just bear in mind that what works for your neighbor may not work for you. There may be some different things that you have to consider. And I know plenty of folks my age and older who have issues like arthritis, or they've got some kind of anxieties, or all these kind of adult issues that most kids don't have. And it can really affect how quickly you learn vibrato and whether you actually ever achieve the kind of sound that you want. And then there's actual physiological issues. We tend to develop different hand shapes over our lifetime, and not just because of disease or something like that, but because of the way we work and how we use our hands in our daily lives. And so for a young person, a 5 or 10-year-old learning cello, it's kind of like a fresh canvas, whereas with us, it's the canvas is not so fresh anymore, right? So we have a couple of things we have to do. So the first tip, other than that there are no rules, now I'm going to try to propose a few rules. One thing that I would do is, let me grab my cello, is I would start without a bow. Yes, do not start your vibrato with a bow, because I think that gives you just too many things to worry about. And really what we're trying to do here is, put away all the stress in the world and try to be as relaxed as possible. So what I would do is I would begin with just plain old pizzicato. And one of the nice things about cello is that you can hear it, you can put your ear down here and you can feel the tones and whatever. And I would just pick some note and let it be some unnamed note. It doesn't have to be any particular note. Just put away the Suzuki and everything else and just pick some note that feels comfortable. When I say comfortable, it's probably not going to be all the way up here, because you really don't want something where your shoulder is starting to become an issue, or way down here where maybe your thumb comes into play or something like that. You just pick something in the middle of the fingerboard and move the cello around. Move yourself around. Wiggle around. Get loose. Go like this, and then just let your hand just relax on there. And very, very lightly depress a note and just give a nice pitch. Okay. And listen for how long that note, I can still hear it. I can still feel it. Right about 3 seconds or so, probably, you can still hear the note. Take note of how long you can get a note to sound. Pretty long, huh? Yeah, I think I can definitely hear it for 3 or 4 seconds, and I think I can still feel it in my chest a little bit longer than that. So let that be a guide. What you're trying to do with the vibrato is not kill. You actually want the note to sustain more. Try to develop the idea that you're actually sustaining the note, sustaining the pizzicato note. And so what you don't want to do is try to cut it off with some kind of really nervous action like that. What you want to do is actually kind of imagine that you're feeding, try to get the sensation that you're actually feeding energy into the note and actually sustaining it longer. So let's try it with a little tiny bit of vibrato. Now all I'm doing is I'm starting with my 2-finger. For a lot of people, because it opposes the thumb, you have the best sort of natural rotation right there. I would recommend experimenting initially with your 2 and your 3 finger. Certainly not with the 1 or the 4. For a lot of people, especially as older folks, that's just hard. And it may take a long time to develop good vibrato on those fingers. So I would start with a 2 finger and with the thumb really nicely, barely clamped on there. I mean, just barely touching the back of the fingerboard, and just give a nice pits. And find a note that you can sustain as long as possible. It's probably going to be something where you can get a lot of overtones from the other notes, from the other strings, okay? And then just add a little bit of wah-wah kind of sound to it. And when wah-wah, I mean like this. Can still hear it? Okay, now the objective here is to add your wah-wah, to add that vibrato in such a way that you don't shorten the decay of the note. You actually want to try to prolong it and imagine that you're actually feeding energy into the string. So let's try it. So you can probably get the note to last at least as long as it would without the wah-wah. You might even get the sensation that you can add a little bit of energy to it. Particularly if you do the next trick, you're going to be able to make the note sustain for a very long time. Now let's think about Indian music. Okay, you're super relaxed, you're in a lotus position, you got the incense, everything. Okay, here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a note up here. Again, it doesn't have to be a name note, just any old note. And just do a couple of back and forth things like that. If you want to get fancy, then you can transfer this vibrato from one finger to another, and that's going to sound something like this. So all I'm doing is I'm trying to develop some kind of wah-wah sound. Now the vibrato that I'm aiming for here is really more of a forearm vibrato. What I'm really trying to do is to keep this almost straight all across here with this clamp here, and I'm trying to use the whole arm motion like that so that I can get a really nice, aim for the lowest frequency, for the slowest vibrato that you can get, because you want the most collective kind of motion of the entire arm like this. So let's try it. And don't be afraid to slide on the note. The advantage of exercises like this is that they require you not to have that death grip. Okay, so a lot of us, if you got stress in your lives, you're an adult, you got a job, all these other kind of things, maybe you had a little bit too much coffee, you tend to have a kind of a rigor mortis death grip there, by which I mean you've clamped, you really clamp hard. It was definitely my issue, is just clamping down like that and sort of feeling like, oh, I want to get exactly the right note. You know, like, well, that's not going to work. What you need to do is relax and perhaps even take your thumb off altogether or just have it barely touching. And just get used to doing that kind of thing. Now, this kind of exercise is not going to teach you to maintain a vibrato for a very, very, very long time. For that, you're going to need the bowing, but I feel like the initial phase of vibrato is really about just loosening up the hand and making sure you don't have the death grip, making sure you know which fingers to start with, 2 or 3 or something like that, and just starting to get a feeling, a sensation that you can actually do this. You can actually produce a really, really nice tone without it becoming too difficult. The next tip that I have is somewhat counterintuitive, and I think it's worth exploring. And so what I do is I get this really, really nasty big mute. This is a cello mute. It costs about $3 or so. You can get one of these things. This is not the Tort style mute. This is a really big heavy thing that's really designed to kill sound, right? So why would I want to use this thing? The reason why I want to do this is that this actually will force you to work closer to the bridge with your bow, and will cause you to develop a larger amplitude of vibrato, and will cause you to be a lot more aggressive with it, which is good. So let me put this on here, and everybody knows what a big mute sounds like when you put it on a cello bridge. It kills the sound completely. I mean, you get something that sounds really. Let's play, for example, open D. Really, really close to the bridge. You have to go really, really close to the bridge to get any appreciable sound. So I recommend actually practicing vibrato when you first start doing bowed vibrato. I would actually do it with the with the mute on and see if that doesn't help, because what's going to cause you to do is to really get down with the bow and to go for a larger amplitude. Something like that. point is, if you can get a decent sounding vibrato with a mute on there, if you can get a decent tone out of it, then you're going to do amazingly well when you take that mute off. Let's see if that's true. Okay, so basically the same amplitude here. And I kind of cheated a little bit there. Notice that I played the D on the G string, and I'm also watching for vibration, sympathetic vibration of the D string. And so I'm getting, that's like the absolute easiest note to get a good tone out of on a lot of our cellos. So, okay, maybe that was cheating a little bit. We could try something that's a little bit more difficult. But I would practice with a mute because it gives you a good challenge to try to produce a big full sound. The mute is there to reduce the fullness of the sound and to kind of take out a lot of the overtones and damp a lot of things out that you would like to hear. And so if you can bring those back through the vibrato, then whenever you take your mute off, voila, you're going to probably find that you have a lot more sound there. A couple other basic tips. Here's a good one. Probably the very first semi-pleasing vibrato you can ever get is actually a vibrated harmonic. And a lot of people don't even seem to even know that this is a thing that you can do actually fairly easily. So when you first start playing half-string harmonics, probably your first introduction as an adult to the higher notes will be with the half-string harmonics, by which I mean these notes here. Notice that if instead of activating the harmonic by bringing your finger down directly vertically on the string, if you move it just ever so slightly to the side, then you can pull on the string like this. I'm going to do an exaggerated, I'm going to pull like that, off to the side a little bit, and you can actually vibrate that. Another good thing about that is that it trains you to find exactly the best finger position to activate that harmonic. And when you get up to the higher harmonics where the sound tends to be rather wiry, like for example, notice that you can very, very easily get something resembling the nice vibrated sound that you're after. That will translate later on when you start working higher and higher up the fingerboard towards the bridge. You'll find that you're better able to develop that vibration there when you actually finger the note as opposed to just playing the harmonic. So that's another tip. Another thing is, as I mentioned before, a lot of us tend to have a death grip in the early stages of learning. I certainly was like this, I want to make sure I get exactly the right note. There has, dispense with the notion that there is an exact note, all right? With vibrato, you're really talking about spreading the wiriness of the initial sort of bowed sound, spreading it into as many different vibrational modes as you can, and really getting a bigger, broader, fuller sound. And so pitchiness, I mean, you may hear your teacher say, well, you can actually kind of hide bad pitch with vibrato. You don't want to develop that. Of course, you don't want to develop that habit, but that is, it is a thing. You can actually develop, if you're loose enough with your thumb and you don't have too much of a grip, you can actually develop a very, very broad kind of pitch pocket that then you can, pick pretty much any frequency that you want. Now, on the topic of hand posture, think about body posture as well. You got to be relaxed and so forth, but hand posture is really a big thing. There's really two extremes for vibrato that I notice among people. One is, and I'll hold my fingerboard just so you can see it, is where the finger is basically perpendicular to the string, perpendicular like that. So there's a 90-degree angle between here and here. And that has some advantages and some disadvantages. The main point is to explore it. So let's explore it. So let's go. I'm putting my two finger, which is a relatively easy finger to vibrate, and I've got my finger almost exactly perpendicular to the string, and I've got it nice and low like that. Let me make a nice tunnel like you're told to do properly. And if you're having issues with the vibrato being too fast and you can't slow it down, why not try this exercise? Why not try to bring your finger almost perpendicular like that and just play with it? I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. I'm saying that it can train you to explore some things with your hand that you may not explore otherwise. The other extreme is with the finger almost vertically like that. And you'll find this vibrato, I think it's really a historical thing. If you go back and look through the historical development of vibrato, I think you'll find that some of the older masters actually went this way. And what seems to work for a lot of people is to imagine that you've got a tennis ball in your hand and you're just dribbling it up and down the string like that. So I would try something. And the objective there is to keep all the joints loose, right? So you want to keep a relatively, I'm always aiming to use as much forearm motion as possible as opposed to finger motion, which is more of a sort of a violin technique. Really getting more like... And now I'm using my one finger, and for that particular finger, and say in fourth position, touching that first note in fourth position, that kind of posture may work well. It may work a lot. It's going to work a lot better than that for sure. But explore, because different fingers in different positions, you'll have different, probably some different techniques that you'll develop subconsciously that'll enable you to get a better vibrato. Certainly as you start moving up the fingerboard and you get past the point that you're using the thumb at all, then you're probably going to become a little bit more vertical and maybe a little bit more side to side. Now, I've noticed one thing that is curious. As we're told as students that we should have this nice tunnel kind of configuration where the two finger has got a nice round tunnel with the thumb like that. I've observed a lot of different cellists playing various kinds of vibrato in different positions, and something you sometimes see is this. You sometimes see the knuckle coming down a little bit like that. I don't think it's a great habit, but on the other hand, there are some notes for which it seems to work really, really well. So I would just keep an open mind and bear in mind that you simply don't want to develop the notion that there's one magic formula for vibrato for everybody, for every single note. What actually works up here may not work down here. What works over here may not work over there. It's just going to take some time. And for a lot of us, growing vibrato really begins on, say, the G string or the D, and there's maybe only a couple of notes where it works, and then it slowly spreads up, and then eventually you start to get something that, you start with a really low and slow vibrato, and then eventually all of us aim to be able to play something super nice, and it's definitely a work in progress, and it can take several years to develop, so you just have to be patient. Okay, so those are the tips. In summary, I would start without a bow and try doing some wah-wah type things and try to keep the finger nice and loose. The other thing is really pay attention to your thumb. Don't get a death grip. Try not to get a death grip with your thumb. Try to keep it nice and loose. When you do start doing bowed vibrato, I think it makes sense to practice with a mute. And finally, just try a lot of different things and notice, the other advantage about using pizzicato in the beginning is that you can use your other hand to kind of move your hand around and try to feel how things work. Well, I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. My name is Keith Williams, and I'm an adult learner. This is definitely a work in progress, but I hope it's helpful to other adults. Bye.